I don't think I need to, but I'll introduce him anyway. We'll start down at the end. Our good friend Tim Bradstreet. First time in Dallas in 7 years.
Wow. It seems like I did it 7 years in a row prior to that.
Next to him, he's never been at the show before. No, I'm just kidding. James O'Barr, one of our favorites. He's like family.
I've never been in this strip mall before. We'll say that.
I'm going to skip to this guy. This is Mark Nelson. You know him, of course. He was at our first Dallas Comic Show. And Mark is no stranger to Dallas. And, of course, the lovely Liz Wrightson, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
And I'm Mark Walters. I'm the guy that runs the show. So thank you for being here. I want to start off, first and foremost, I want to tell a little story. And I hope Liz is okay with me telling this because I think it's a fun story.
I guess I'll find out.
So this panel is primarily a tribute to Bernie, because we were all very good friends of Bernie's and we love Bernie and we do want to talk about Bernie, but I also want to talk about Bernie Wrightson. Wow, you're editing me on stage. It's amazing. James actually was sending me editor notes for articles I had posted. Anyway, he cares enough. So, but I also wanted to mention, because we were all good friends with him as well, the very first Dallas Comic Con we ever did in 2002, our guest of honor was Dave Stevens, and Dave was a very good friend of mine. And I have a special connection with Dave through Bernie and Liz, because we all actually went to Dave's funeral together, which sounds sad, but was a very fun trip. It was actually a very fun trip.
Road trip of sorts.
And so the story I want to tell, which actually isn't about the funeral, it's about shortly before Dave passed away, he did a yard sale where he sold off a lot of his personal effects. And so Bernie and Liz went to this sale and they bought what I think is a very cool thing. They bought Dave's backdrop that he used at all of the San Diego Comic-Con shows, which he would set up behind his booth.
And his chair from his drawing table,
Right.
which I still own.
Does it have the bulldog on it?
No, it was just like it's just a backdrop. So like it's stuff you hang prints on and things like that.
Oh, gotcha.
So and then of course when Dave passed away, we went to his funeral. Right after that, a couple months later, we go to San Diego Comic-Con. I flew out. Liz and Bernie were still living in LA at the time. I flew out to LA. We drove down to San Diego, and we were going to set up the booth, Bernie's booth, with using the backdrop, which was the first time you guys had used it. So Bernie and I, we pulled this thing out of the case. We're trying to put it together, and we realized, because this is the thing that Dave set up every year at San Diego Comic-Con, there's no instructions, because Dave knows how to set it up. We, on the other hand, have no idea how to set it up. So we were futzing around with this thing for like 2.5 hours trying to figure out how to put it together.
That's where you go find Bill Stout.
Right. We finally put it all together. We figured it out. And I told Bernie, I'm like, Dave's looking down on us and laughing at this, because it's hilarious. And so when we finally put it together, I swear this is almost over. We finally put it together, and there were 4 lights on the top of it that would shine down to light up the booth. And, so we put it together, we put the lights together, and Liz, I think, plugs in the lights, and we go to turn it on, and all 4 lights come on, and we're like, it's like this victory. We had finally finished this thing. And then one light, remember, this is me, Bernie, and Liz putting this together. One light slowly goes out. And it was like Dave saying goodbye to us. It was just this really sweet, it was just this really kind of sweet moment. And I don't know, I always love that moment. So, what?
Which light was it? Was it the one by you, the one by Bernie, or the one by Liz?
It wasn't by any of us.
That's a shame.
What
It
difference
was
does
the
it make?
one by Dave.
It might have been
It was,
foreshadowing.
it was
something.
Dave's light. That's what matters.
You're looking at it in that light. Now I'm trying to make
So
it.
I just wanted to share that story because that was a really, first of all, it was a fun moment for me to do with you guys, but it was also just kind of a fun, it was a way for us to kind of, I guess, say goodbye to Dave in a final way.
Speaking of Dave's funeral, I was at David Scow's that night hanging out, and I got a call from Thomas Jane on the road. Just got pulled over by a cop after Dave's funeral.
I remember that.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And I said, how fast are you going? He said, on 120. He was driving his Maserati. And I said, dude, slow it down. The cop let him off. He was a Punisher fan. I said, slow it down, Tom. Let's just make it home in one piece. He's like, yeah. He said, it's the Maserati. How can I drive it slow? About 30 minutes later, I get another call from Tom. He's been pulled over again. And they've let him go again. Yes, different cop. Also a Punisher fan. I'm like, Tom, do not stretch this any farther. Next guy busted him. So Tom spent the night in jail after Dave's after Dave's funeral.
Fairly on.
You find those occasionally.
Well, I first met Bernie and Liz at Frank Darabont used to have a dinner at San Diego Comic-Con, and I was with Tim, and I got invited to go to. So it's great Tim's here too. I got invited to go to.
He was lucky enough to be outside with me when Frank came by,
Right.
and he said, "Bring your friend too."
Yeah.
And Mark was like, "I get to go."
Yeah. This was right before. This is right when they announced that Frank was going to do The Mist. So I guess this would have been like 2004.
Frank's a director and art collector.
Right. And so I met Bernie and Liz at that dinner, and yeah, and we just really hit it off. And then I think I saw you guys again at Dragon Con, and then I was like,
Were you with the guy selling lightsabers?
I was no,
Okay, because I thought we met in a more casual fashion than that, but
no. I think that was our first time to meet, and then we saw each other again at a couple more conventions, and I was like, you guys have got to come.
That's
to
right,
Dallas.
yeah.
So and we just. Yeah, years ago.
Is that what I did? Yeah.
The real Dallas Fantasy Fair. Yeah.
I only ever read about the Dallas Fantasy Fair in like Epic Illustrated when Archie Goodwin would, he'd come down to the show and he'd find a bunch of artists that were kind of unknown or, were incredible but weren't getting kind of the visibility that they deserved, and he was showcasing them in Epic Illustrated, which is pretty cool.
Well, and an interesting bit of trivia which relates to Bernie, the guy that used to run the original Dallas Fantasy Fair was Larry Langford. When the show went under in 1996, there was a little show that was put on in place of it,
Mark's show.
which I helped put together. Bernie was a guest at that show.
yeah.
But I never met him because I was too busy doing other stuff. So it took me several years after before I finally got to meet him. Yeah, no, I was not. There was no Starlets back then. So, but no, I mean, Liz, when we first met, I think we hit it off really quickly.
Yes.
And then I discovered you were a Star Wars fan, which made you even
Yes.
better. So
Everyone knows that, right?
yeah, Liz is
Not your average everyday Star Wars
not just
fan
a Star Wars
No.
fan, a droid builder,
I
an
build-
accomplished cosplayer.
R2D2.
Yeah. I have a whole Star Wars bathroom. Luckily, Bernie really liked. It came with me. when
You
we
got,
moved in
Bernie, you
together.
got Bernie to dress up in Star Wars
I did. I
cosplay,
got him into the
which is
501st.
no easy feat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's an Imperial officer. He looks really good, like Tarkin.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Well, I thought a fun way to kind of get this going would be for each of us. Tim, if you want to start, talk about how you first met Bernie and like what that experience was, and then how that maybe that related to getting to know him years later.
I should have prepared myself better for this question.
I can go first if you want.
Yeah, you go first. I've got to narrow it down.
I'm from Detroit, and I'm from Detroit, and there was a little comic book show held in a hotel, the Detroit Triple Fanfare, and it was in the hotel. It was in the ballroom of the hotel, and
Classy.
I was like 12 or 13, and it was like, oh my God, Bernie Wrightson's going to be there, and he had just started doing Swamp Thing. It was like maybe, but I had loved his stuff before that, the House of Mysteries, monster stuff, and
All the creepy.
yeah. So I'm like, oh, I have to go. I was horribly shy back then. I don't know what happened, but yeah, I went to meet him, and it was him, Mike Kaluta, Steve Hickman, and Steranko was there too, but he was like a prince. And Vaughn was there. That's when I met Vaughn too.
Wow, what a lineup!
Yeah. So
Von Bodie.
who ended
Vaughn
up
Bodie.
being kind of my mentor. But yeah, it was just like
I opened a huge door for you too. That Von Bodie's a big one on your radar.
So So, but yeah, I met Bernie, and I wanted to know, because I was 12.
What a crazy, awesome weekend that must have been.
Well, and in retrospect, it was like, what a fucking awesome weekend. But at the time, I was kind of starstruck. And so I went up to Bernie, and I'm like, how do you do this? And what, and he looked at my stuff, and he said, oh, you're showing a lot of promise. And then he would like sketch over my drawings to show me what I was doing wrong. But mostly it was about like, how do you get all those great shadows? And he gave me some advice that I still use. You draw your figure, you pick a light source, and then you stick with it no matter what. It's like, it doesn't matter if you drew the perfect arm and the perfect hand. If it needs to be in shadow, you just black it out. And the viewer's eye will fill it in. And I still use that to this day. I was talking to Bernie about it later, and he was like, oh, I was probably like 22 maybe. But to me, it was like this no icon. Mike Kaluta was like, if I'm going to draw, somebody's going to have to pay. But no, it was, just like he spent time with me. He looked at all my stuff. And it was a great, it was a life-changing weekend because, I got to meet all those people. I got to be good friends with Ron Bodie.
Subsequently, Mark.
Mark. Mark crept in.
Wait, this Mark? Not Mark Nelson?
No.
Mark Bodie.
Oh, Mark Bodie.
Mark
Okay.
Bodie,
Yeah.
Ron's son. Right.
Yeah, that was another like weird thing that like 94, like, many years later I saw Mark at Dragon Con doing, his dad used to do this,
the cartoon concert.
His dad did this wonderful thing where he would show an image, like a panel on a screen, and then he would do the voices of all the characters, and he called it his cartoon concert. And then 15 years later, I see Mark doing the same thing at Dragon Con with the same voices, and at that point, Mark looked a lot like his dad. So it was like this really bizarre kind of Twilight Zone thing where I felt like I was lost in time. But I went up to Mark and I said, hey, my name's James, I knew your dad. And here's my book, we're making a movie out of it. And he was just like, yeah, whatever. Because he hears that shit all the time, or he did back then. But subsequently, we became really good friends, and we've done art projects together. So yeah, I was 12 years old when I met Bernie, and he was kind and gracious and humble. Because to us, they were like rock stars,
Yeah, it's like that picture of the studio that looks like a picture of Led Zeppelin, and Barry Smith looks like Robert Plant. Bernie looks like John Paul Jones. Bernie he was never flashy.
No, but he was a handsome man for sure.
You look at John WRIGHTSON right now and pretty much see what Bernie looked like when he was 24.
Yeah. I've often said if they made a movie about Bernie's life, that like John could play him,
His son.
and it would be eerie because he looks so much like him now.
Yeah, Bernie's got one son named John, named after.
His father.
Oh, what is it? We always used to give him shit that he named his kids after the guys in the studio.
Well, Jeff.
Jeff got the short end of the stick on that one because he's going to have to change his life at some point. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, it's Jeffrey Michael.
Oh wow, he almost got the trifecta.
I know. So yeah, his younger son is Jeffrey Michael, so Jeff Jones and Michael Kaluta.
I think the first time I met Bernie must have been in the 80s. It must have been in the early 80s. I'd seen him at a show before, but I didn't approach him.
He's scary.
I was 13, I think, and there were a lot of people in line for him, and it was just one of those things where I just was like, oh, there's too many people, I'm not gonna. I wanted to meet him, but it seemed very difficult to do it in the time that I had that day. My dad brought me up to Chicago just to see people like Bill Sienkiewicz, and the first time I met Tim Truman, he was pretty new on the scene back then. But I think Bernie was working on The Cult, So that must have been like 84. And I met him at a Chicago Comic-Con and gave him shit because he wouldn't sign his name like he used to that you could read. And I was like, could you slow down for one of them and sign it so I can read it? And he goes, oh yeah. And then he signed that one, and it was the classic Bernie Wrightson signature, right? And I was like, oh, yes. I can go home happy now. I think Mobius was at that show too. Bernie and Mobius were sitting right next to each other, yeah. We used to always be up at Chicago Comic-Con. That's where I first met James too.
When it was in the basement of the hotel.
Yeah, and then moved to the Ramada in O'Hare, which is where this one was. And Bernie was, I think, a guest of honor at that show along with Mobius. So they were off in this room, and Mobius was drawing sketches for everybody, and Bernie was doing sketches, little quick sketches for people. And, you know, I briefly spoke to him when I got up to him, but it wasn't until years later that we became friends, and I'm going to have to blame his ex-girlfriend, Joy, for that. I'm sorry to bring her name up, but my wife
What an ironic name.
my wife was up at the show with me, and my wife's a pretty cool chick, and Joy saw someone that she could actually talk to. Instead of like, you know, there was a lot of, she turned people off. She was a little wild, crazy. My wife didn't give too much of a crap about that. We liked James anyway. Yeah. Listen, no, you met her. You met her years before that at TackyCon, Orlando, Florida.
She had a brother that
committed suicide, and if you know, I'm the world's misery dumpster. So if we have something sad to talk about, James understands. So we became like best pals.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are soul people. Yeah, you guys got the connection. But Bernie, it was at a Detroit show, and all of a sudden my wife and Joy had hit it off, and all of a sudden I was trading a piece of artwork with Bernie. I'm trading a piece of artwork with Bernie Wrightson. I'm like, Missy, what did you say about it? What did you do? I got a really nice piece. I don't even remember what Bernie got, which means I got the better part of the deal. And then, I think about 3 weeks later, I got a call. Bernie was going out to California, and Frank Darabont had bought a bunch of his Frankenstein stuff, a film director. And Bernie he was ready to go out for that pack of cigarettes you never come back from with Joy. And he kept driving all the way out to Los Angeles, and he ended up in Frank's bungalow, where he lived for like a year and a half, I think. But it was during that time that I got to know Bernie. I came down for I was working with Sideshow back when they were a garage kit company, and they had done a model kit of mine, and I was at a model party in Los Angeles, and really got a chance to hang out with Bernie that weekend. But Darabont came down to the show, and he invited us all to dinner, so we all went over to his house that night. It was pretty great. Sitting there with Bernie at Frank's house, and this guy next to me is talking with this Australian accent, I'm guessing, and he's talking about this and that, and we're talking about horror movies around the table, like you do when you're at a director's house, right? So I was talking about like good movies you've seen recently that were actually pretty decent. I was talking about that the Ghost movie, the Frighteners, and I go, I love that movie. And I started going on and on about it, and Frank goes, well, why don't you tell the director what you think? He's sitting right next to you. So the guy with the New Zealand accent I've been talking to all night, because I'd just gone to Sydney for my honeymoon, was Peter Jackson. And Fran was sitting across, and they had just come back from New Zealand. They were working on King Kong. This was before Lord of the Rings. And Bernie was down in country in New Zealand for how long? I mean, that was before you, but it was a few months, yeah. And they got their financing pulled, and so everyone had to come back. And it was I think it was their first week back in town. He did a bunch of a bunch of people got worked on that. I think not Alan Lee, but some other really great like illustrator worked on that. And before that, it was I think
Because I saw some.
right. Oh yeah, cool. Yeah,
I saw some of Bernie's artwork on DVD.
And I had no idea he worked on it.
yeah. Well, it was a dream. You know, Bernie was like he was in heaven. He goes, I can't believe we lost. They were kind of still thinking they might get picked up. They weren't giving up yet, but they were talking all about it, and it just made you're an artist, you're sitting at a table hearing Peter Jackson and Bernie Wrightson talk about King Kong, working on a new movie. It was just pretty cool, pretty darn neat.
And Bernie's not in a lot of credits because often you're hired by the effects house or whatever design.
Frank did a lot of work for
subdivision.
K&B, so he
And
didn't get credit.
Yeah, so there won't be any credit for the artists that did a lot of the design work necessarily on the screen. There
Never. Like, except
No.
for the faculty. I mean, like all
Yeah, there's
kinds
a
of-
few that were more prominent where they did acknowledge his design work, and he would talk about those. But yeah, he worked on
Nick
Ghostbusters.
Cotero was always a held Bernie in high esteem.
Yes.
And when he would give Bernie work, he would try to get him credit.
Yeah, he would
And I
try,
think
but there's all kinds of
eventually-
rules around that.
Yeah.
What level you are if you're
Because he
get
knew,
credit or not.
obviously he knew who Bernie was, so
Yeah.
he was like, if we're gonna have Bernie, we got to put his name on this because.
Unlike some
it's gonna
directors who would just
bring people
rip
to the-
Bernie's stuff off
Yeah.
and send them an 8x10 photo, which actually happened once.
Yeah.
Name and shame.
Name and
But
shame.
the thing
Kenneth Branagh.
the thing about Bernie though, that kind of, and then we'll get to Mark here in just a second.
Mark, we're out of time. I'm
is
sorry.
Bernie was just such a nice person, such a approachable, gregarious person. You didn't, very humble. You didn't, and that was what was amazing about him because you already had this preconceived notion of who this guy was, and then when you really get to know him, you realize, or you get to know him a little bit, you realize that he's just like everybody else in the room, and you can't say that about all those guys. You know, a lot of people wear that on their sleeves a little bit too much, and a lot of people wear it out.
I
But
think
Bernie never
because of
did.
the way he illustrated, people assumed it's like this is going to be a scary guy.
Bernie was
And
always
he wasn't.
the opposite of what he drew, yeah. Except he did have the macabre eyebrows. The macabre eyebrows were
The
legendary.
curb feelers.
I want to hear something from Mark Nelson.
Mark Nelson, let's
Mark,
go.
tell us your story.
Why the broad time?
No, I'm kidding. It's all you, baby. Go.
Personally, I think that Bernie's years with Fleetwood Mac were my favorite. I can't have stories like these guys do, you know? And then the waters parted, Moses came out, Bernie gave him a drawing, the world was all right, you know? Because I'm sort of a bear in a cave. And I get out to some conventions. I mean, I met Tim because we worked together at a gaming company. I think we met at a gaming convention. Yeah. Did you? Well, I know Tim did, yeah.
Every artist loved Mark.
Somebody give him a microphone.
Yeah.
He loved Kirby monster things, and he had these huge metal sliding shelves. And what was your favorite one you bought all the pages to?
Mogumbo.
Mogumbo. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
And I was like this.
Not Crackapoo?
I was like this dirty Slav Columbo guy walking through his studio, dropping cigarette ashes everywhere.
It's like a shambling mountain.
But James is just so damn cute, you know. You can't. Well, this is. I mean, I hate
And
to
that was
say
like
this.
in Wisconsin or Milwaukee.
Anita never let me smoke in that house. DeKalb, Illinois.
Hey Tim, I found the. Remember when you gave me that little squeezed pterodactyl?
Yeah.
It's in my studio still. You know that.
It makes the most horrible
It's in my
sound.
studio. Well, mine is so just boring. The only reason I met Bernie about 3 times. I don't have a great story like these guys do. He was an incredible gentleman. One was at the convention he put on, and I got to talk with him and give him a copy of my book and talk with him, Kelly Jones, and Steve Niles. And then the other convention, Liz came over and looks through my work and buys a drawing of mine. And I'm kind of like,
I like to buy art.
yeah,
Whatever
she
I
was very
can.
kind and generous, and I went over and talked with them for a little bit and did that kind of stuff. And you know, I never got the joy of that. But now, as far as knowing his artwork, I have followed it since the early things when he was in Herbdom and different things in DC Comics. I can probably tell you almost all of his work. I have a huge collection. Back for More, that book. I have all the books. I have 2 copies of the studio. You know, I mean, I've always been a huge fan of
Oh, I
this
knew I
stuff,
picked up my
the
extra.
Swamp Thing and everything else. And so artistically, I would say, not having got to meet him as personally as these guys, as personal as Liz got with him. Whoa.
Are we going to tell my story?
I hope so.
All right, then
Okay.
I'm going to end
Oh
real
yeah,
quick.
Liz, how did you meet Bernie?
Yeah, Bernie was a big influence, and has always been an influence on my art. And just looking at his brushstroke quality, the sense of drawing he had, and just for some reason, what I have to honestly say is, when I look at his artwork, I just see a lot of love in there. I've seen artists that are very much technicians that can paint refrigerators like no one you ever wanted to know, but their art is just soulless. But I've always thought Bernie's artwork was full of soul.
Yeah, there's certain artists I look at and I go, wow, that is, he knows what he's doing. Technically, he knows what he's doing. He knows how to tell a story. Jim Lee, did I say that out loud? But I look at Bernie's stuff and it makes me want to run to the drawing. And that's the difference.
That's what the great, like everyone, a lot of people will say, I quit drawing after and I like the guys who say, I went home and drew for a week after because it's that inspiration, you don't be intimidated by it. And Bernie never would be that guy anyway. He'd be the guy that'd make you feel comfortable. So
Yes. One of the first things I did was draw in front of him so that I would never have that fear. And if anything, he's very good constructive criticism. So.
No, and that's really the whole thing about it. So if you get a chance to look at some of the original drawings and things like that, to see the marks and the strokes and how things are, I can't tell you how different it is, and I'm just going to use one old illustrator who's one of my favorites, and I know Bernie loved his work too, Franklin Booth. But owning an original Booth piece and sitting there and looking at the mark and the stroke, and you can see how the pen cut the paper, is so different than any other thing that you're ever going to see. And just feeling that surface and doing that kind of stuff. And all the original artwork I've seen of Bernie's is like that. You just go, I gotta go home, I gotta get better. And that's what you gotta do. When you find someone's work, you analyze it, you pull it apart. As my old teacher said to me, to steal from one is plagiarism, to steal from many is research. So believe me, I have researched
inspiration.
All right, Liz, let's hear your story.
I'm up. Okay. How did I meet Bernie Wrightson and end up marrying him? I was a fan from way back in the 70s and collected comics and started going to comic conventions in the late 70s with my then boyfriend, who's like, they have these places you can go and you can hang out and meet the artists and everything. I'm like, wow. So our local show was San Diego Comic-Con, which at the time was very small. Went for years and years and years. Pretty much never missed a year until sometime in the 80s. But I never met Bernie. I would always, for some reason, just miss him. And he was my favorite artist. If you're a fan, you know this. His style is so distinctive that...
He'd always be out smoking. That's why you never
well,
saw it.
that's probably why I never met him. So, anyway, life goes on, and I end up going and doing other things with myself, and don't go to conventions for years and years. And then I decide I'm going to start going again. And I decided, I also, internet had happened, and I was looking up Bernie's work, finding out that he had, a whole website and everything. And so I actually joined his fan club and found out that he was going to be doing this little convention in Los Angeles, the Roosevelt Hotel, which is a legendary location. And I told all my friends in the fan club online, I'm going to go meet Bernie finally after all these years. They said, oh, you'll love him. He's super nice, so friendly, make you feel right at ease. So I go to the convention, and I walk in the door, and I can see Bernie. He's like 2 tables in from the door, and he looks up, and he jumps over the table and runs up and throws his arms around me. And of course, I've never met the guy. I thought, I'm like this, thinking, he is friendly. Anyway, he obviously...
It was between girlfriends at the time.
Yeah. No, I think he had like 3 other women he was dating, but whatever. Yes. Yeah. Anyway. I called him a slut, but anyway.
Masher.
So that's how we met. It was him, like, with his arms wrapped around me, and he said he realized as he was leaning in that I was not his friend Paula. but he felt committed, so he just went for it. He just went
The
ahead
true
and
nature of
went
theater.
for it.
On with the show.
Anyway, so that was an icebreaker to be sure, and we just hit it off and became friends and hung out and ended up falling in love.
They
And
found
that
out
was
they
it.
were both geeks.
Yeah, we're
and it was
total
good.
geeks. Well, we went to each other's apartments for the first time. They were decorated identically. I mean, really, when we eventually combined households, it was seamless. You can almost not tell whose stuff is whose. He had
So you get to
Star
the
Wars
bones.
stuff. I had bones. I had jars full of weird-looking liquids, although his jars had snakes in them. Mine were just like, this is cool. I had jars of dirt. So anyway, you don't need to hear about my weird collections, but that is the
22-year-old
story of
pudding
how we
collection.
met. And that's it.
I think it's. I remember you telling that story, and I always thought it was really fun. And all the times I got to visit with you guys when you were out in LA, I was very lucky, and I don't think I really processed it until later. But I was very lucky to get to go see Bernie at the studio and watch him work. And I would find myself.
You didn't have to process it later. You knew exactly at the
Well,
moment you were seeing.
I found myself, like, I would be sitting there and I realized, I think 30 minutes has gone by and we haven't said a word to one another because I was so enamored just watching him work. And then I would apologize and I would say, I'm sorry I'm not talking to you. I'm just so fascinated watching you do what you do. And he was just like, oh, shucks. Well, thanks, Mark. I mean, he was so humble about himself, but he was cool. He was cool enough to allow you to do stuff like that, to be able to just watch him.
I
Yeah.
have a question for Lynn.
Yes, Jim.
Really, did he know how good he was?
Yes. Yes, he did know. Yeah.
I got a really good
He
story about
had,
that.
yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, it's just kind of a fun aside. We were at a Mad Monster show, Mad Model Party.
Be humble. Still know how good you are.
Yeah, definitely. And Bernie was set up across from me, and I'm sitting next to Nirasawa, this Japanese artist. And this guy walks in, and he walks over to Bernie's table, and all of a sudden they're hugging each other and embracing like brothers. And so I was curious enough at that point that I had to walk over and find out who this guy was, and it turned out to be Bruce Jones, who is a great artist in his own right, but wrote a lot of stories for Bernie back in the Warren days. And I think Bernie even did some stuff for him for the anthology books he had at Freak Show, but then there was also
Kamiko.
the Pacific books, yes.
Sorry.
Alien World.
Thank you, Alien Worlds, thank you. Thank you very much. Too much coffee. Great. There's people sneaking in on this, but I forgot where I was going with that. You guys go ahead.
No, you were talking about.
So Bruce Jones, I meet him, and Bernie hands him Now this is around the time I have to say this. This is around the time Bernie. There was a rumor going around that Bernie couldn't draw like he used to, and that he was just kind of burnt out. And Bernie himself. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. And Bernie himself would say, well, I broke this hand or something. And
He broke a wrist.
He broke his wrist, and he said, so I can't really draw like that anymore, and blah, 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 blah. Well, this thing that he brought, I guess he brought it was a birthday present for Frank Darabont, and so he brought it out with him, and it was a gigantic graveyard scene, classic creepy magazine kind of shot of a ghoul rising out of a grave, the big mansion behind him, and other ghouls rising out of graves. It's all snowy, so he's got the negative space. It's just brilliant. And I'm like, when did you do that? He goes, oh, I did that a couple weeks ago. And I went, so this thing about the hands is bullshit, because this thing was unbelievable. And I went, so you've just been relaxing. That's what you've been doing. So I glided a little bit, because he'd gone through his life to that point living check to check, and I'm like, that was the thing that surprised me the most when I met Bernie and became friends with him, is that he wasn't a millionaire, like he wasn't living in the hills somewhere. Like, this guy lives check to check just like I do, and it just didn't seem right.
I have to agree with that.
I just thought that was
It never
one of the
felt
most-
right. Why aren't we all
horrible
billionaires?
thing. I mean, I remember we were in 2000. We were working on Blade 2, and I came over to hang out with Bernie, and I was going to take him over to our office to look at our stuff. And this is back when Bernie had one of the last Frankenstein piece, or maybe one of the last Frankenstein pieces he still owned, was Victor in the windowsill with the rain. It's kind of like Bernie's Conrad Hall moment, you know.
Self-portrait.
It was just, it's my favorite Frankenstein piece. And so I used to sit in his living room in Valley Village and just look at the thing for 2 hours, 3 hours, you know, whatever, while Bernie was doing whatever he was doing. And then he ended up selling it. And he had to sell it because he had some the big tax bill from the federal tax bill. And so I'm like, I tried to get Guillermo to hire him to do storyboards, and he was like, I want to do it. Yeah, well, Guillermo goes, I am not hiring Bernie Wrightson to do fucking storyboards. So it turned out that Guillermo's the one that bought that piece. So Guillermo owns Victor in the Sill, which means that I can probably take it away from him if I have to. I can take him.
Can you see that it ends up at my house?
I will do what I can. I will do what I can.
I'll help then.
I get the
We'll
scan.
write about this caper later.
Yeah, we'll work it out. But yeah, I mean that's another thing is that occasionally, like I remember one time there was an auction, a charity auction, and Bernie had done this beautiful piece of artwork, and the original was going away, but they had a scan of it, and so Bernie sent me the scan, or Liz sent me the scan, and I printed some out on this really beautiful art paper and brought it to the show, and everyone was like, where did you get those done? I said, did it myself. You guys should just buy a printer. Because it really is amazing.
And we
to
did.
see Bernie's stuff like that is just amazing. But, again, it's just an aside.
Well, and one of the reasons that I was so happy to have Liz here this weekend, because once Liz started doing shows with Bernie, I think it was one of the first times that Bernie told me this several times. He said it was one of the first times he really felt comfortable at conventions, because
Well, he wasn't being ripped off by somebody.
that's a big part of it. That you were really looking out for him and taking care of him, and you were just such an important part of his life. And so it was like, I couldn't even imagine seeing him at a convention without you there. You know, I just don't think it would have seemed right. So I'm very happy you're here with us.
Thank
this
you.
weekend.
It's good to be
Yeah.
back.
He did them solo
I
forever,
love.
but-
He occasionally, and he would occasionally have to do it if I couldn't come with him because
Right.
I had other work myself. But it was always really enjoyable to help. Well, it started off helping, and then I was fully a partner. But I love meeting all the fans and hanging out with other creators. And
I'm so glad we got to
others.
keep Liz after Bernie passed away. I was like, Liz can't just fly off into
Let's
the
not even
stratosphere.
talk about that.
Yeah, so I was like, she's not
Keep
going
Liz.
anywhere. We have
No.
to keep her.
Yeah.
Well,
Well-
and I'm going to say this. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you said something to me after Bernie passed away. You said you were worried that you would not be able to go to conventions anymore, and I told you that was nonsense because I told you people loved you and they would want to see you at conventions.
Aw. Thank you. Thank you. Well, and I do feel like I made a lot of really nice friendships that are truly friendships where we do keep in touch, all of us. And
Anytime someone famous dies, there's that, and it happens more often than not, that you just become that person's widow, and it's like we didn't want that for Liz. She was our friend. I knew Bernie for decades, and I never saw him happier than when he was with Liz. So,
And Liz is that, John's not really got the time to do it. Jeff, I don't think, is interested in doing it, but someone has to carry the legacy.
Yes.
And Liz is more than game for it, and that
Yeah.
it couldn't be in better hands.
I am absolutely working toward making sure that his legacy is preserved and that the fans are kept informed as possible. Given my schedule, I do my best. But I want to keep him out there. Keep people.
People will be
different-
interested in Bernie Wrightson
Yeah,
forever.
I want each generation to learn about his work and have it available to each generation going forward. So.
we need to keep it in print.
It's funny, Bernie never like cast aspersions on anyone. He was just a nice guy. It took a lot to piss him off. And I remember the one time that I felt like I almost crossed the line with him. It was like, and all the time I knew him, he never said a terse word to me. And even after I insulted him, he didn't have a terse word for me. But we for some reason we were at somebody's house. I can't remember, but Stout was there and some, the usual crowd. And Bernie had just made a deal with, or I guess the Frankenstein book was being republished by Dark Horse. And we were looking at the pages, and I go, oh man, those fucking design idiots never know what they're doing. And he goes, what? And I go, see this? Each of the chapter headers has this like sample of what's inside, but then it's around the edges, it's just softened out. And I thought, that just does not fit Bernie's work. It's so soft, and his work is not soft. It should be hard. And Bernie goes, that was my idea. I went, oh, well, it still sucks. I was like, I just had to go for broke, But he never was offended by that. And I think, putting myself in the same position, I thought of this on the way home. Would I have been offended? And I'm like, I think it's pretty magical that he wasn't.
Mark, do you have a fun... Have you ever pissed off Bernie Wrightson? That's what the panel's turned into. Have you had a story where you pissed off Bernie?
It would be a story because it doesn't happen.
Right. No, it is. It's
Yeah,
very rare.
I never had a story like, I don't have a story like that either.
In all the years I knew you
we were
guys.
together for 17 years, and we
Yeah.
never had a single argument. And people think I'm making that up, and it's absolutely 100%
I
true.
believe it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
The only time I ever saw Bernie mad was we were having drinks one night, and I brought up
Dark Horse.
He who shall not be named, the director we talked about earlier.
Oh, the other the other one.
And I just asked him, I said, so what happened with that? And he started telling me the story and was getting progressively more and more angry as he was telling the story, and then reached a point.
Kenneth Branagh, who directed that horrible
Yeah.
Frankenstein movie, which is unfucking watchable.
Took Frank Darabont's
Correct.
incredible script and ruined it.
Ruined
Right.
it, and also just stole all of the artwork, which was known to be up in the office, in his office. Just stole it for.
I think we show up
for
at
art
Brano's
direction.
house and say, where's your storage room? I think we got some art to collect.
But that's the only time I ever saw him mad, when he was telling that story. And he reached a point where he literally stopped and he just looked at me and he goes, I don't want to talk about this. And it was the only time I've ever
And
seen Bernie mad.
It's literally true that Kenneth Branagh really did send an 8x10 of himself, signed, thank you for the inspiration, Bernie. That's what Bernie got for being completely ripped off.
And I asked him, I said, did you immediately start throwing darts at him?
What did he write on the back? Do you remember? It's somewhere in my house.
There's a lot of love for Kenneth Branagh in the room right now, so I'm going to add to
He
it.
said something like, Kenneth Branagh ripped me off, and all I got was this fucking 8x10.
I worked on the covers for the comic book adaptation, so I had all the photography and all that stuff, and I was doing these covers. And so when I showed up at that Mad Model party where I met Darabont, this is how I met him. I was sitting there with my portfolio at our spa, and Frank comes up, and I'd never met him before. I didn't know what he looked like. He's flipping through my book, and he gets to the page of the Frankenstein page with Branagh, and he goes, "Hey, it's my movie!" And there's the motherfucker who ruined it. You gotta love Frank.
I tried to watch it. I tried to watch it like 3 weeks ago, and it's just fucking torturous,
De Niro is the creature. I mean, it's set up to be incredible.
It's idiot-proof, but it's so egocentric that.
Too good of an idiot.
Yeah, it's the ego movie for sure.
Yeah, and it's like Kenneth Branagh with no shirt on, and every line he speaks, he turns towards the camera all theatrically, and it's soft golden light behind him, and I'm like, what the fuck? This is Frankenstein.
Yeah, not a Victor sex symbol movie.
Yeah, it's just awful.
I mean, it's you look at that movie, the production values were there. They had everything. They just had a director at the wrong part in his career. He rewrote everything too. The script I got was almost, it looked like one of those redacted federal, spy things. Most of it was black, and then notes in the margins where Branagh had written out, taken out an entire scene and stuck in his own. So good times. Bernie was there. Bernie shared in that a little bit. This got something to do with Bernie.
This might be kind of a fun way to kind of wrap it up a little bit, but we'll start with you, Mark. Do you have a favorite Bernie Wrightson piece, like a particular piece of art that he did that really spoke to you and made you think, wow, that's something I just never thought I'd see.
What's your favorite period?
My favorite period. When people always ask those questions of me, like, what's your favorite movie? My answer is always, what genre, what era.
Boil that down.
And I'm not going to boil it down because historically, he's done too much stuff that's affected my life, from Web of War, all the way up to Frankenstein, all the way up to the Batman stuff, all the way up to the Spider-Man, all the way up to the Franken stuff that it ended with.
I'm just going to go with the entire body of work.
Yeah. So
I'm glad you mentioned,
Which is fair.
I'm glad you mentioned the Spider-Man stuff. I love that Spider-Man hooky story. I thought it was great. Yeah, really.
Darabont had that hanging in his bathroom for 10 years.
Right about the time.
think about it, and everybody always usually says that Frankenstein is the best work that I think he collected in time and effort into.
That's what he'll be remembered for.
That is work is that's all, peaks that you have as an artist. A peak where you're going up and down in your valleys, and he was brilliant at that, but he was brilliant with whatever he did. I didn't see too much that I think there's artists and we all do it. You just go, yep, I had to whack it out. And that's it. I didn't see it.
How about you, Tim? I'm gonna finish with Lit.
Well, I mentioned the Victor piece, and I would have to say that I'm a huge fan of all the creepy stuff, his brushwork, but Frankenstein was it was one of those things that it was so beyond. Like, you look at some of the stuff in there and you go, how was that even possible with a human hand to do that? Those lines.
And there's no whiteout.
And
Frankenstein?
it's funny, every time I get
There's a little whiteout.
every once in a while, I'll find myself in a point where I don't have any inspiration to get up and work, and I'll be listless, and you can't force yourself to work those things. When I pick up Frankenstein, or I'll pick up a look back, and he always, Bernie, without even knowing it, saves me a lot, because he relights the candle for me. When I see his work, it's a challenge, right, to even understand how he did it, and that's part of the fun of looking at it for artists. I think they try to reconstruct it in their heads, like, where did he start? How did he attain this? And there's a magic to it that saves me every time. It always inspires me, makes me want to draw, and I never thanked him for that. But Liz, you can thank him tonight when you say your prayers, okay?
Okay.
James.
My favorite. Like Mark, his whole career was inspirational. I mean, there's a couple pieces that
The monster, the sequential story.
Yeah.
Frankenstein stuff.
Well, there's that. Okay, and you guys will know, but it's the Solomon Kane piece that was that it's almost pure shadow, and it's just it's one limited light source, but you can still tell exactly what's going on. That one I studied. He did, like, it wasn't even a full page ad for the Shadow comic book. I guess at some point he thought he could do 2 comics at once. Shadow walks into a room full of gangsters. He turns out the light, and he's got 2 45s there. And it's the most perfect page ever. It's hanging in right above my drawing board. It's just, there's so much mood and atmosphere and energy in that it's just like, if I need inspiration or something, I always ask myself, how would Barney do this?
It's kind of like illustration. Whatever stuff on the room, the inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pure film noir. But I loved his stuff for Warren, Creepy and Eerie, and the few that were in Vampirella, because I think that was like the first time it's black and white, so he had total control over how it was going to look. Yes, yeah, and he could do anything he wanted, from ink washes to painting, to cross hatching to brushwork. So I mean, that's my favorite era. I mean, Frankenstein is a peak, but that's something I can never aspire to. So, but the Warren stuff, it just looked like he was having so much fun, and he was working with great writers. So that's my favorite period of Bernie.
Liz.
Okay, well, I'm gonna be the opposite one here. I can zero in on a piece. That would be for the poster series Mementos. That's the heads on the fence. And the reason for that is it tells me everything I need to know about the personality of the artist. He has a very dark sense of humor, and that is also a thing I share. And so I knew we would get along. And it's emblematic for me, even though it's color. Excuse me, I'm sorry to do that in the mic. How disgusting. It's color, but it's so funny. It's so funny, and he has said this in interviews before. It's not really horror. If it was horror, it would be feet. But it's like their heads, and they're all like wearing glasses, and they got the ties on and all this, and it's delightful. And
Inspired like Rick Baker and a bunch of guys to do that. A bunch of his workers put together a movie.
Yes.
That was the centerpiece.
I have a copy of that movie, and there's also a model maker that
props are amazing.
Yeah, made it, and I had the props too. But there's a model maker that made the whole thing too, which is really nice. I love seeing that kind of fan work. Yeah, because it's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. So that's easily my favorite piece, and with respect to the entire corpus.
A lot of people go counsel to a minion. I'll go. That's a huge one. I got to go back to Victor and I said that before, but again, it's so hard to put your finger on the one. I love how Jim can do that. That speaks to you. That page speaks to your sensibilities all the way. And it just so happened that perhaps your favorite artist did a page of that kind of thing, or a story based, in that wheelhouse, and for you to have found that, grabbed it, and made sure you were the one holding on to that. I love that.
Yeah. It's the same reason I love Change for a Dollar, because it's totally Bernie's humor with the horror in it.
Yeah.
So, well,
or the post where some of the Master of the Macabre stories with the frogs.
Oh yeah.
All the ironical ending stuff, and just that always spoke to Bernie. The ironical ending. There's always a story to be told, even if it's just in a single image.
Right. Want to add something, Mark? Yeah, real quick.
One thing that I was really going to... Is my mic on? Is mine... Okay, this one's on.
I think you killed this one.
I rolled it on the table. The one thing that I was going to say, as an artist, you're always challenging yourself to get better and draw and look and learn and do different kinds of things. Now, recently, I was sitting down and I've been playing with this attitude in my head that I want to do some snow things. So you play with some really strong black-white contrast. You play with that whole thing. And you want to know something? That night I was going through Facebook. There she posted this beautiful drawing of Bernie's of just this little werewolf up on the ridge looking down at this house. And it was all done in that silhouette. So no matter what you're kind of doing, you can find stuff by other artists that do spur you on. And you do learn from them, and I'm sure he would have said the same thing, that he was learning from all these other people around him.
Is that a forever baby?
Yeah, and that's the thing that you want to really sit down and do, Don't just, that's why I say I can't pick one period, because it's like there's too much good stuff. If you want to play positive, negative, he's got it. You want to play dark shadow film noir, he's got it. You want to play minimalist stuff like Stern, he's got it. You want to play this kind of a game, he's got it. There wasn't anything he couldn't touch.
Well, we absolutely, that's a perfect way to end it. I just want to say that when I started I've been doing these things for a long time, and some of you guys know me from Dallas Comic Con, and I went back on my own 3 years ago. And my first show back on my own, Bernie was not in the best of health, but he was there for me, and I really appreciated the fact that he was there for me. It just meant so much to me that he was there. It ended up being one of his last shows,
but you know, he was such a good friend that he would never cancel on me for any reason, and I just always appreciated that so much. So, and I really appreciate your friendship.
I got lucky too. It was probably a couple months before Bernie passed that I was at that Tampa show with you guys, and I hadn't seen you guys in a little while. The last show we were at, you guys were set up so far away that we hardly saw each other over the weekend, but in this one, Saturday night, we made sure we took a little time. It was the end of the night. We were all going to bed. We were like, let's talk for a little while. Turned into like 3 hours. But it was great because I felt like
It's a weird, funny hotel that has everything's a suite, so we all had little living
Yeah.
rooms and
With
little
boxes of
balconies,
goodies.
and yeah, it was fun. So
Take
yeah,
care of your attention.
yeah, and at this show too.
But it was great because it was a great time catching up with you guys, and it didn't matter that was the last time I saw Bernie. I got the hug, I got the wet kiss at the end of it,
It was always a wet kiss.
but that's how Bernie sent a little of his love home with you.
It is.
A little saliva to take with you.
We have to wrap this up because we have another panel, but I found, as I was going through my convention stuff, from my first Dallas Comic Show, the 2-day pass that has Bernie's artwork. You're each going to get one. So thank you for coming to the panel. And please come see Liz.
Thank you.
And thank her for being here as well. We love you guys. Thank you for
Straight
coming.
against that wall if you
Yes.
haven't seen me already.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Liz. Yeah, absolutely.